After our last hearing, President Trump tried to call a witness in our investigation, a witness you have not yet seen in these hearings. That person declined to answer or respond to President Trump's call and instead alerted their lawyer to the call. Their lawyer alerted us, and this committee has supplied that information to the Department of Justice.
All right, that was just one of the explosive new revelations from last night's January 6th hearing. Donald Trump personally attempted to contact a witness in the investigation, which is an act of potential witness tampering that we now know has been conveyed to the Department of Justice. Now tonight, we've got breaking news about that witness. Just within the hour, CNN has reported that the witness Trump is alleged to have called is, quote, a member of the White House support staff who was talking to the House Select Committee. NBC News has not independently verified that report, but according to CNN, the call was made after former Trump White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson testified publicly to the committee. The White House staffer was in a position to corroborate part of what Hutchinson had said under oath, according to the sources, end quote. Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony included multiple explosive revelations about the former president's behavior during his time in the White House, including accounts of the president becoming physically aggressive with members of the Secret Service and throwing food across the room that White House staff had to clean up. Joining us now is the former federal prosecutor, Joyce Vance. Joyce, good evening to you. Let me first start by getting your reaction to the news. It's important because of the potential for this to be witness tampering, right? The idea that whomever it is, in this case, it's a pretty important person, the former president of the United States, calls someone who might know something about what Cassidy Hutchinson said, whether or not the former president knew that this person was in touch with the committee or not. Tell me about why this is a problem and what you think of the story that is just developing.
Right. The core of this crime, witness intimidation, is the notion that you can't have someone who's perhaps a target or a subject of an investigation attempting to use any sort of inappropriate pressure to either hinder, delay, prevent, or alter a witness's testimony. It's a very broad statute. It tries to contemplate all of the possible circumstances where someone could try to tamper with a witness, and perhaps importantly here, it even reaches an attempt to intimidate a witness that ultimately is not successful. So that sort of pops a context for us to appreciate this breaking news tonight, that what we would be learning about would be a call made by the former president to someone on the White House support staff. And that's a really unlikely call for him to make in just the normal course of his operations. This is someone who spoke dismissively as people as being mere coffee boys in the past. So unlikely that he would have a sort of sustained friendship here. And that feeling, I think, is confirmed by the fact that whoever the target of this call was reached out to his or her lawyer. And in that short amount of time that you were delivering that answer, we have now confirmed that this story is true. The CNN reporting, MSNBC, has now confirmed to be true. Talk to me about the point you were just making, that there might be a situation where Donald Trump or anybody who is even marginally a subject of an investigation would have an ongoing relationship with someone who may or may not be talking to the committee. Where's that line between I was just calling him versus witness intimidation, and how does that get established? That line depends upon the government's evidence. For instance, if there was a voicemail message that was left, probably unlikely since Trump is notoriously shy about leaving any kind of a trail. But if he left a message that said, listen, I want to talk to you before you testify, I'm concerned. Well, that might be some helpful evidence. But something that we know here is that because Liz Cheney announced that they had referred this to DOJ, that means that there's no more proactive investigation going on. Either DOJ has evidence of witness tampering or they don't. It's not possible to do anything undercover at this point, perhaps to have a phone call take place that would be taped. So whatever the situation is, it should be clear from DOJ's point of view, remembering that this statute is meant to be very broad and very expansive, because at the heart of our criminal justice system is the need to find out the truth about situations. And if witnesses can be intimidated, can be threatened, and can in other ways be encouraged to not tell the truth, then our system breaks down. So DOJ has a history of pursuing these cases pretty aggressively. Interestingly, both Roger Stone and Jared Kushner's father were prosecuted for witness intimidation. It is not a crime that DOJ tends to sit on when the evidence is there.
Joyce, we did have you scheduled to talk about other things having to do with the investigation, but it was through good fortune that you were here as this news broke, and we appreciate you helping us analyze it. As always, former federal prosecutor Joyce Vance, we always appreciate your time, Joyce. Thank you.